So with all this talk about Doge and how that's going to potentially shake up sort of the federal employment landscape and potentially how that's going to even impact something like the DC real estate market, let's talk about it, because I've seen so many bad takes and people just catching all sorts of flack for suggesting that something like inventory for sale can't move higher. And although, listings are still quite low in that market, it is possible that it's going to move higher from here. And that is a completely just conservative take. People think that that's a bold take, but in fact it's not. When you start looking at who actually lives there, the housing stock, the employment landscape, all of it. So if you want to just look at something like active listings in isolation and assume that's going to tell you everything you need to know, then you may as well extrapolate stupidity, because that's like virtually meaningless on its own. So the DC metro area, quite large, 6.3 million people, give or take, live there. And when I'm looking at these markets, I prefer to look at not only at a high level in terms of across the metro, but in segments of these markets, like these individual counties, and you can take it even further. So why don't we look at the most populous county, and that is Fairfax County, Virginia. It has a population of around 1.15 million people. In the aggregate, it is a younger county, although it's getting older. It's younger than the national average, but getting older. The population really hasn't been growing there since about 2017, 2018. If you look at the actual households, this is a homeowner's market. It's not unusual to see that when the population is just younger, and there's a lot of families here, family households. The households themselves tend to be a bit larger in size than, say, the national average. And although active listings are still low in this market, it is structurally oversupplied from a historical standpoint when you look back at that information. So in 1970, there were around 0.29 homes per capita. In 2023, that figure is closer to 0.37, 0.38. The reason that's lower than the national average is because there are just more people per household, as I alluded to, in the fact that it's a family household market predominantly. So the shape of that trend is more important than the level. The trend looks exactly like it does at a national level. So mechanically, the fact that there are more people per household means that that ratio is just going to be lower. It doesn't really matter. That same trend is still there. So when there's excess structural supply, it goes up. When there's less, it goes down. And when there's too much, it goes up again, as it is doing now. But again, active listings are low, so it matters who's buying these homes. Well, you know who's buying them, and this is not unusual to see across all sorts of markets. It's oftentimes just older people. And like I said, this market is getting older, but in the aggregate, it's still a younger population. So there's a lot of older households coming in, buying homes cash. On top of that, you still have investors that, from a historical standpoint, they're quite active there. They're still capturing purchases in terms of market share, and even though home sales are down, pretty low historically, they are still capturing a good bit of that activity. Now, if you look at more of those household metrics, you will notice that the incomes are very solid in this market. And like from a, if you were to look at married couples, you're talking about they're pulling in on an inflation adjusted basis. Household incomes are right around like $200,000, give or take, as of 2023. That's quite good. When you look at like the share of cost burden homes in this market, I have seen more cost burden homes than a place like Fairfax County, although it is heading in the wrong direction. And even though it isn't the most cost burden market, you are still seeing stuff like delinquencies pick up in this market, just like you are across pretty much every market to a certain extent. But even though you're having a lot of older people come into this market and buy homes, cash, as you will see when the population is younger, and by extension, so are the households, more of these households actually have mortgages. And I'm not talking about stuff like unpaid balance or who has what rate, whatever. Just in the aggregate, I mean, like 27% of homeowners in this market don't have a mortgage. At a national level, it's a lot higher. It's at right around 40%. But look, what on top of what's happening is, because the population is younger, and by extension, stuff like employment population ratios, labor force participation rates will just be higher for younger people because they have to work unless there's some like trust fund baby. The labor market is softening. Right now, the unemployment rate as of December 2024 is not seasonally adjusted, I want to say 2.3%, and it is in a very well-defined uptrend. And you may say, well, that's low compared to, say, what it is at a national level, which as of January is at 4% seasonally adjusted. And that seasonally adjusted is what gets all the attention. But it is in a well-defined uptrend. I mean, there would be no other reason to see stuff like delinquencies picking up if these markets weren't having issues. And it is. It's not catastrophic, but they are still experiencing some hardships. So, is it possible, based on everything that I just described, that inventory for sale will move higher? And the answer is it is. I mean, permitting has picked up post-COVID there. It's still well below, I would say, trend in terms of, you know, like what it looked like pre-GFC. But all of that is a function of population trends, household trends, housing unit trends. All of those things, broadly speaking, trend together. So people want to look at something like active listings in a market like, you know, Fairfax County, and there's only like 900, roughly speaking, for sale, when there are 430,000 homes in that market. And you want to look at the 900 and extrapolate that shit? My God. And there are people on, like, Twitter who are ready to die on a hill from some guy who's incredibly outspoken. What say you? Debate me. And he's doing technical analysis on active listings, like, for the United States, which are at, like, roughly speaking, 900,000, and there are 147 million homes in the United States. Congratulations, you're capturing less than 1% of the entire housing stock. What the fuck did you just do, if anything? Oh, man. Dude, I bet that guy gets, like, a Scooby snack from NAR every time he fires off "not in my market," so he can just get all these completely brain-dead lenders and realtors all fired up about some virtually meaningless math. So, don't you think that's a little bit more comprehensive of approach to figure out where we're going from here versus looking at shit in isolation and not really doing any sort of analysis? Guys, this is nothing but the wealth effect, right? That's all this is. The government is just propping stuff up because they know how important that is to consumer spending. You may as well say, if you're going to suggest that there's a housing shortage, you may as well say that QE isn't real or the wealth effect isn't real. You don't really understand, like, what the fuck is happening. So go for it. Anyway, happy Monday.